and words would leave me, if you allow me, to another kind of question, an important question, which is to know if the populist radical right in Europe is at a point of realignment, and if it can succeed in detoxifying its brands. And we also have mentioned this here today. I think radical right in particular has been doing this for quite a time. And that increases the difficulty to fight this vast set of parties, this panoply of parties. One of their biggest assets is precisely the way they manipulate language, the way they appropriate terms, they reshape theories. And it's interesting and ironical because they all talk about purity, but what they have is a completely subverted relationship with the truth. And this goes well beyond being flexible. This is far beyond flexibility, because what we see in radical right is that everything can be revised. History can be revised. History can have new narratives, because basically their relationship with the truth is instrumental. What is the truth? I mean, almost like Pilatus was asking. And that also explains, I think, this classic aversion we find among these parties against, sorry, I have all of it, sorry, this sounds as is the mail arriving, sorry. I was saying, for me, I think this also happens, this also reveals, sorry, the classic aversion these guys have against science, against scholars, against intellectual. And this happens, in my view, not just because these parties are against, you know, because science is connected to intellectual elites and they have this aversion against elites. I think it goes deeper, and it happens because science demands honesty in the relationship with the truth, which is something that is quite complicated in their case. So radical right discourses are quite efficient in terms of creating empathy in large publics. They explore victimization, and we know how people tend to be sympathetic with those that are victims. They explore emotional metaphors and simple language. We just have to think about the dichotomy us versus them. It's the most simple we can get. Us, the national people, the good people. In Portugal, these guys, this radical right wing is talking about good people, good citizens, the real hard working people, versus them, the elites, intellectual elites as well, but also migrants, the refugees, the ethnic and gender minorities, the bad people, those who do not want to work, those who depend on public subsidies. So this is very, very simple, straightforward language and line language, as we know, but it works. And they are also discourses about justice or the lack of justice. And we know how sensitive people are to this basic value. So this has been the basic recipe of many radical right parties and leaders across Europe and the world. But as these parties reach local and national, once they reach, not all of them, but once they reach national and local power, and it can be through coalitions in government or simply by increasing their share of seats in parliaments, for instance, they all tend to be more ambitious, and they have become more ambitious over the last decade. They all dream about reaching power, and therefore they all start equating the possibility of ways of detoxifying their actions and their speeches, and they begin to explore new areas that may grant more electoral success. And that is, I'm afraid, the case of ecological and environmental concerns and climate change that we find nowadays entering the populist radical right. And it's very interesting because this goes well beyond old eco-fascist approaches. It has nothing to do, this has to do with putting denial aside, denying the global climate change, and trying to integrate in their own language these worries, because they know that this is popular among younger voters. And they are also doing the same with concepts, not just justice, but also social protection. Of course, and I'm almost finishing. I'm sorry, because I always lose track of time. Well, someone can argue, and we can argue that, okay, they are striving for protection, social protection, but it's a selective form of protection, because it's the protection of those seen as deserving to be protected, which follows their moralizing reading of society. Still, it is the value of protection that they are exploring. And that includes also protection of nature as well. That is my point. So justice and protection, two values which are so dear to social democracies, to our social democrat progressive parties in Europe, and which are being completely appropriated and pervasively reshaped by these parties. So I think they are trying, and in certain occasions they are being successful in trying to detoxify their speeches as a way to gain power. Let me just conclude, John, and I promise to shut up, but after all that I said, and it seems that I don't look very optimistic, I suppose that the obvious question in people's mind would be what to do. I mean, what is there to do when we look at this? And I don't have a straightforward answer, but I believe that much can still be done and must be done at the local level. Local communities, local authorities, local media, churches, legal agents, schools, they are all very important in this fight against extreme and radical right ideals and the populist approaches they have. So all these people, they have to come together and discuss and learn together in local fora. And we know that this has been happening a bit all around Europe, but sometimes it's kind of, sometimes these projects are dropped, abandoned because they don't seem to work. We have to figure out why they are not working and still persist in this kind of approaches with the help of experts, of academics and so forth, because we have to find the best ways to approach the communities, to identify the presence of far-right extremism, or at least, I would say, the conditions that may trigger its emergence. And they must articulate this in action plans to fight these things. And one major dimension of these plans has to be communication. We have to learn to communicate better. It's fundamental to help people in our local communities to understand what is at stake, to explain why far-right extremism must be fought, what are hate crimes, why a free, fair, and decent society cannot cope with these kind of things. And this must be said loudly, consistently, in a very clear and simple language. We have to name and to denounce behaviors that damage the very foundations of a democratic society. And I'm a great believer, perhaps because a great scholar that I admire is Ricard Zapata from Barcelona, a great friend of mine for many years. And I'm a true believer of the benefits of intercultural experiences. So city halls, different stakeholders, NGOs, immigrants associations, they must set the scene for intercultural projects. And why do I insist in this, and why do I see this as important? Because this has to be as housing policies, as important as job creation, as access to services. Because if we eliminate what's at the root of the problem, then we will see that the capacity of these far-right parties, whether you call them radical, whether they are extreme, these populist far-right parties, they will lose their influence significantly. So it's important to work at the local level and go to the bottom of the problem. And Alison also mentioned here some of these aspects that I find very, very relevant. And now back to you, John. Sorry for talking so much.